The fact is, socialism doesn't work any better here than everywhere else in the world has been tried. And as Margaret Thatcher famously warned, sooner or later you run out of other people's money. When we cut taxes under Trump, our revenues did not go down, they went up because of the economic expansion that they produced. The Democrats had never understood that. Truman did, Kennedy did, but these guys don't. Until we control our spending, we are not going to solve this problem. And that's going to require members of Congress to pronounce the most abhorrent word in all of Washington, the unspeakable word, the dreaded and forbidden N-word. No, we can't afford to support 5 million illegal aliens that the Democrats have allowed into our country.
Now, I talked to a lot of Vermonters like all Americans, and they love their freedoms. And they want us to be fighting for fairness. I hear these two things probably more than anything. They want a fair shot. They want to know that they're not getting gouged while others continue to grow their great wealth. They want tax fairness. They want us to ensure that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share. This does not make them socialists. We know that increasing enforcement of tax collection raises revenue and benefits our economy. And Americans overwhelmingly support these measures. This, again, does not make them socialists. I mention this because my colleague earlier in this hearing brought up the hackneyed, tired specter of socialism. I urge us to be more intellectually honest here. Wanting freedom and fairness does not make one a socialist.
This is a ridiculous expectation, so ridiculous as to raise the suspicion that it's intended solely to render the bill unworkable and meaningless. This amendment would serve only to challenge law enforcement who are properly doing their job to stop smugglers and illegal aliens from terrorizing their communities.
If the gentleman has opposition and has an offer to define actively assisting, then that would be great. But the reality is that what's going to happen is what we've seen happen in the state of Texas, where we have a governor who has murders on his hand as far as I'm concerned, because we've had active deaths at the hands of mishandling this. If this is going to be a federal issue, then the federal government needs to be the ones that are absolutely going to be over federal law.
Last session, the Democrats made a mockery of impeachment, and we cannot allow them to become our teachers. Shrill voices should be kept far from this inquiry lest they undermine its legitimacy and credibility. Congress has an obligation to approach serious accusations seriously. The Democrats would have us simply turn a blind eye to mounting evidence of a family influence peddling scheme that implicates the president. This we cannot do. We owe it to the country to get to the bottom of these allegations, and that requires the House to objectively invoke its full investigatory powers, respect the due process rights of all involved, and lay all of the facts before the American people.
The Republicans have already spent 12 months on this exact investigation. They have obtained more than 100,000 documents, pages of documents, and dozens of hours of witness testimony. But there is simply not a shred of evidence proving any wrongdoing by President Biden related to his son or otherwise.
Allowing foreign nationals to cancel out the votes of American citizens makes a mockery of our democracy, and it robs Americans of our sovereign right to direct our own government and decide our own destiny. Washington, D.C. belongs to the American people, who retain through their Constitution the exclusive right to govern it through their elected representatives. This outrageous law is the strongest argument yet for Congress to take back America's capital city for America and to take back America from the radical left.
Here's Justice Scalia on what the very distinguished gentleman from California just described as a radical practice. In general, non-citizen voting has been open, widespread, and unchallenged since the early days of the Republic, says Justice Scalia. What they would like to portray as some kind of outlandish practice is one that has been used at various points in our history by a majority of the states, certainly at the local level. And it was the Republican Party again, I reemphasize, which was the great champion of non-citizen voting and stood up for it against the states that ended up seceding from the Union in the Civil War. We were debating the very point the gentleman fastened upon when we talked about the census. The Supreme Court has been emphatic repeatedly that the census counts everyone in America, citizens and non-citizens alike. Now, we know they don't like that. They've been trying to get around it in a dozen different ways, but the Supreme Court has been perfectly clear that everyone is counted in the census, even if they don't have the right to vote, even if they're not a citizen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As legislators, it's our job to make sure we are not moving forward with drafting legislation that is on its face flawed. If we want to legislate and address immigration, let's mean what we say and do so in an effective manner. And this bill does not live up to that standard. The inclusion of the term actively assisting is ripe for judicial scrutiny and will undoubtedly result in court challenges, wasting taxpayer dollars and government resources. But fiscal issues caused by poor legislative drafting are the least of my concerns with this bill. This language is so deeply concerning because we already have been witnessing how aggressive policing tactics and unconstitutional racial profiling directed by rogue governors like Governor Greg Abbott have led to severe harm to and has undermined our legal system, all in the name of actively assisting the U.S. Border Patrol. Take, for instance, this past Christmas, where U.S. citizens, a husband, wife, their 13-year-old daughter, and their grandmother living in El Paso were wrongfully targeted by Texas officers in unmarked vehicles after they were coming back from visiting relatives just across the border in Mexico. The officers ran the family off the road, and at least 4 Texas Department of Public Safety officers wearing street clothes and tactical vests quickly surrounded their car and began pointing semi-automatic rifles at them. Because of the accident, the grandmother had to receive x-rays and still has lingering back pain. The daughter, likely traumatized from having weapons of war pointed at her and her family. No one, including me, doubts more must be done to address the problems we are seeing at the border. But this type of unlawful harassment of citizens is not it. And to be clear, my amendment in no way prevents federal, state, or local officers from working with Border Patrol agents, nor does it say that federal, state, and local officers do not have a role to play here. In fact, several border counties, including counties in Texas, already have U.S. Customs and Border Protection memoranda of understanding with state and local officials to work with immigration enforcement. Nothing in my amendment would prevent these written agreements that lay out their clear chains of command and clear codes of conduct. But what my amendment does is to prevent state and local law enforcement from acting lawlessly at the misguided direction of a governor who refuses to work with men and women of the United States Border Patrol because he thinks he is above the law. If my Republican colleagues reject this amendment and keep the current language, they are supporting actions that have historically lacked due diligence to prevent harm and encourage lawlessness that leads to more dangerous instances like the one that occurred at Christmas. If the House rejects this amendment, it will give Governor Abbott a tool to carry on in his unconstitutional border policies without federal oversight and coordination. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you, and I reserve.
Gentlelady from Texas reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
To claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment requires a new fact to be proven at trial, that the pursuing law enforcement officer was, quote, under the command of the U.S. Border Patrol in each and every case. Well, I can imagine many circumstances where local law enforcement's alerted to a Border Patrol chase that's going through their jurisdiction and then act immediately to assist them without necessarily being directly under their command. The issue is not who is pursuing smugglers, but rather the circumstances of the pursuit. Namely, this person is evading the Border Patrol. It's unlikely that during each and every pursuit in progress, the Border Patrol is going to have time to deputize local law enforcement, place them under their command. This is a ridiculous expectation, so ridiculous as to raise the suspicion that it's intended solely to render the bill unworkable and meaningless. These high-speed chases occur far too often in our border communities, and state and local law enforcement are often first responders in protecting these communities, along with the Border Patrol.
If this is going to be a federal issue, then the federal government needs to be the ones that are absolutely going to be over federal law. So they can have memorandums of understanding. If that means that every single county at the border needs to go ahead and enter into a memorandum of understanding, then they need to. But this is a federal issue. It is not a state issue. And this protects federalism and makes sure that it will be under the hands of the federal government with this federal law instead of state government. And I reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from California is
I'm
recognized.
prepared to close when the gentlelady's finished.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
I'll yield back.
Gentlelady from Texas yields. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I was just shocked to hear the gentlelady accuse the governor of Texas of murder. This is an example of the kind of extremism that we see on the left in this House today. Now, the fact is the Border Patrol agents are strained to the breaking point by this administration's open border policies, and they often rely on local law enforcement having their backs. You know what active assistance is? It's a high-speed chase is going through your community, and you're there in a position to back up the Border Patrol. You can't negotiate that. You cannot be deputized. That is part and parcel of law enforcement. You have to spring into action. Whenever local police are providing this assistance, they should have the protection that this bill provides. And it also puts every smuggler on notice that if you're trafficking human beings or drugs across the border and you're pursued, well, you darn well better pull over. Apparently, this is just too much for the Democrats to bear. I'm not sure whether we should laugh this amendment off the floor or merely defeat it, but in either event, it's a foolish idea. It deserves a no vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields. The question on the amendment is offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those in favor say no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas will be postponed.
My amendment explicitly prohibits carrying or having readily available any firearm, dangerous weapon, explosive, or incendiary device within the hearing rooms and conference rooms of this committee.
Does the chair believe that members of Congress should be able to bring firearms into the Natural Resources Committee or not?
The chair believes that members of the Natural Resources Committee should follow the House rules and the guidance by
Yes,
the Capitol
and
Police.
the House rules, members have different interpretations of what those rules are. I need to know, for a sense of my own personal safety, what your interpretation of the House rules are as it pertains to this issue.
I believe that would be a question you should take up with the House Administration Committee, and they do have a Members' Day, as all committees do.
So just in summary, the decision as to whether or not the chair believes that firearms should be permitted in this committee is determined by House admin. But the committee has not been in touch with House admin as to whether this should or should not be allowed. And so therefore, we're just going to leave this ambiguous?
I believe it's up to every member of the House to follow the House rules.
I just wonder if the gentleman from California or the gentlelady from New York has reason to believe that there is a homicidal maniac amongst us. If they do, they probably would have brought a gun into this room, whether or not there is a law. And I would challenge them right now to present their evidence, name the names, and present the evidence before such a catastrophe confronts us.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
ThanI believe it's a
Courtesy, by the way, you didn't give me, but go ahead.
It's a mischaracterization. While I am not here to impugn the character of any individual member of this committee, I do believe that the performance
Of course you
demonstrated
are.
has
Because
shown
Who do you not trust to bring a firearm into a committee room or anywhere else
I
in
believe
public?
that from what I've witnessed, the competence of some members may be something that I would be willing
Well,
to question.
I think you should give
Thank
us
you.
names before the sun goes down, because we're all in great danger if you're correct. But if you're going to name names, I'd like you to present the evidence as well. And if not, then we should draw our own conclusions.
Will the gentleman yield just a bit?
Sure.
First of all, I don't think any member of this committee should have a weapon in this committee room. I believe that's the only reasonable interpretation of the House rules, but what we have heard today, I think reaffirms the concern that that's not how everybody sees it. Some members either aren't interpreting the rules right or think they don't apply to them, and
If the
that is
gentleman
cause
doesn't
for
wish to
concern.
carry a firearm,
And
I
I would
invite
just,
him not to carry a firearm.
I would just say in addition that this notion that we're all responsible, vetted individuals, there's nothing to worry about, is pretty cold comfort when we have members of this institution who, it turns out, weren't so well vetted. We don't really know a lot about each other. And we're finding new and interesting things about some of our colleagues every single day. So, thorough vetting is cold comfort, sir, and I'll yield back.